But hello, all. My name is Sarah Jewett, and I am the Senior Vice President of Strategy at Vervo Energy. I've been here for about 6 years, and I joined Vervo from the oil and gas industry, which is not an uncommon, past history for employees at Vervo. And the real reason I often say is because oil and gas is a really interesting industry, has a lot of very smart people working in it, and geothermal provides an opportunity to use our powers for good. And it's an industry that's been around for a very long time, but we call this the geothermal decade because we're really reinventing the way the geothermal energy industry works, and that's why it's an interesting time to talk about it now. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what Fervo's doing, and I'm happy to take plenty of questions about anything you want to ask. So with that, we will get started. 304, I'll talk for about 10 or 15 minutes. I like to start with Vervo Energy's mission, which is to leverage innovation in geoscience to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. What you should read from this is that we are a technology and innovation-focused company innovating on an old industry. We're also a group of people who are very focused on climate change. Because of that, I know Citizens Climate Lobby through much of my advocacy work, actually at the federal and state level. And because we are here at the intersection of oil and gas, using oil and gas technologies in a clean energy industry, we really do benefit from bipartisan support, which has been a truly incredible thing over the last few years. When I started in advocacy at Vervo, we had very little reputation in Washington, and we were mostly forgotten. And at this point in time, we were very regularly in the conversation as a high potential, high growth industry that could make a meaningful difference in the energy landscape in the future. And that is Vervo Energy's mission. We're a core value focused company as well. I think it's very important to just start here because any new developers who come on the scene and say they're going to reinvent an industry have to make sure they're doing it the right way and they're not cutting corners and they're delivering projects in a way that truly are sustainable, not just as clean energy projects, but sustainable for the communities that surround them, sustainable for the states in which they operate, sustainable for the people they're providing power for. So that is a big part of who we are. We say we like to build things that last, which means sustainability from an all-in approach and not just from a clean energy approach. We're very focused on health, safety, and environment. We're running a very professional, very safety-minded culture out on site. We say we always do what we say we're going to do. And so we're really, really focused on delivering the projects that we say we're going to deliver. We value innovation through collaboration. We sit at the intersect of many different industries, and we need a lot of smart brains in order to solve this very hard challenge of climate change and to reinvigorate an old industry. So we're a highly collaborative group of people who also stops and smells the roses on a regular basis because we are operating big infrastructure projects on a very long timeline. And it's important that we sort of celebrate the small wins to keep our culture happy. I think that's important to kind of like give you an idea of who we are as a company and a little bit of a framing before I launch into all the really cool details about why the market wants us and why we're actually going to meet the market. So why does the market want us? I think if you all are thinking at all about energy or AI or have read the news at all, you realize that we're in a truly once in a generation experience in terms of energy demand in the United States. We actually used to say at Vervo, when I started at Vervo, we said that we were already in a generational difference demand for energy, and AI wasn't even really part of the conversation at that point in time. So there's just a massive headwind, or I guess tailwind, into new demand for power coming from electrification, onshoring of manufacturing, just general, industrial loads in the United States. And then you put data centers and AI on top of that. And you have kind of like a new market of demand happening in the United States. We're seeing supply chain constraints in the natural gas industry. We are obviously not seeing, rapid new coal plant build out. We're seeing a lot of wind and solar deployment, but wind and solar doesn't cover load for all hours of the day. And so there's a question of how we're actually going to meet the growing demand for energy. And this drives a pretty interesting, what we call a limitless demand for the product that we're providing. We're providing a high capacity factor resource, so geothermal is not dependent on the weather, so it produces all the time, and we have a greater than 85% capacity factor resource. So we say it's reliable or firm or 24/7 power. So if I interchange those terms, that's really what I'm talking about. It is a clean energy industry, so we are zero emissions when we're operating. There are some emissions associated with construction, and we're working to reduce those emissions every day and pull emissions out of the construction side of our business. And then affordable is the last, leg of the energy trilemma. And we are relentlessly focused on execution and repetition to drive cost out of our business and reduce the historic cost of geothermal energy, which has historically been very high, and make it a much more ubiquitous, affordable, and more widespread energy source to meet this once in a generation demand. So this is a little bit of a repeat of what I've just said. On the left side, you see emissions high on the left side, low on the right side. And on the y-axis, you see capacity factor, high capacity factor, low capacity factor. We're living in this top right corner of a low emission, high capacity factor resource. And we live there with nuclear energy, which obviously is a big part of the future solution, but is somewhat delayed at this point in time in a large scale development in the United States. And then hydropower, which is still a very reliable renewable energy resource, but is not being built out at a rapid rate in the United States. We like to say that we're a complement to all of these resources. So we're a complement even to that high emission, high capacity factor resources like natural gas and coal. And we're also a complement to, the low emission, low capacity factor resources like wind and solar. And we're really just helping the whole picture come together. But it is a really nice value proposition to exist here in the top right corner as a reliable, clean, affordable resource. And I'll talk a little bit about our speed. So what are we doing to reinvent this industry? When you look at the map on the right-hand side, all those little yellow dots are where traditional geothermal resources, also called conventional or hydrothermal geothermal resources, have been identified in the United States. Traditional geothermal resource is characterized by large natural fractures in the subsurface, and traditional geothermal operators would drill a single well into that and either pull steam out of it or a double, two-well system and push water down. Then it flows across this natural fracture system to a production well. They pull it out of the production well as hot water or steam, run it through a turbine, generate electricity, and then either vent it to atmosphere in some power plants or re-inject it into the subsurface. This traditional form of energy really relies on this naturally occurring, very specific resource. And so that is what is represented here by those yellow dots, as places where we know that that specific resource exists. But if you look at all of the orange and the red and the yellow in the United States, that is all hot rock at depths that are economic to drill today with modern day technology. So the question then sits, okay, if there's just a massive amount of hot rock, can we actually access it outside of these very specific geographic regions that have identified hydrothermal resource? And that is what we are going for at Vervo Energy, is to not rely on these naturally occurring systems and to instead engineer our own subsurface radiator in what we know to be hot rock. So how do we do that? This is a simplified schematic on the right-hand side, but we use techniques that are lifted from the oil and gas industry to drill a vertical section of these wells. And then when we get to the depth we want to go, we turn horizontally and we drill what we call a lateral, which is typically a mile long or just over, a 2-mile long section in the hot part of the rock. And so we drill parallel pairs of wells like that. And then we use traditional hydraulic fracturing exactly from the oil and gas industry. That's actually where I started my career, is running frac crews in Wyoming. We use traditional hydraulic fracturing. Obviously, there's no oil and gas, there's no hydrocarbon in these resources, but we are pumping the same high pressure water and sand down our wells to create these little cracks. You can see them here in these, represented by these little red cracks. So we use hydraulic fracturing to actually connect our wells hydraulically And then we basically push water down an injection well. It flows across the little cracks that we've created, heating up, and then we pull it out of the production well. So we have essentially made, man-made, an engineered radiator in a hot portion of rock. We have heated water that way, and then we pull it up, and on surface, we run it through a heat exchanger where we strip all of the heat out of the geothermal brine. We transfer it to a working fluid that goes through the power generation and cooling cycle, and then we re-inject 100% of the geothermal brine. So we sort of vision it like two closed loops, the subsurface being a closed loop of cold injection, flows across the resource, warm production. There's heat exchange happening at the surface, and then we re-inject 100% of the subsurface fluid, which is water, back into the subsurface. So this is what we're doing at Fervo, and this is kind of what defines EGS, Enhanced Geothermal Systems. EGS is just a term to describe engineered geothermal systems and is differentiated from traditional hydrothermal systems. I'm happy to take questions about the technical, but I'm going to move on to what we're doing. Today, we're building a 500 megawatt project. So in 2021, and then delivering in 2023, we built a very small pilot project in north central Nevada. It was 3 megawatts, and it was at an existing power facility. And it went really well. We produced the heat that we thought we would, and we've been producing those wells for 2 years' time. And that allowed us to begin construction on our first large greenfield. So today we're delivering a 500 megawatt project. 100 megawatts of this overall project will be delivered this year in 2026. This is one of my first public presentations of 2026. And I am so used to saying it will be delivered next year that I almost said it, but really it's 2026, which is probably why I'm feeling so much stress and anxiety. We're delivering 100 megawatts to the grid this year. We've now drilled over 30 wells at our project site and have tested a number of them, and we have 3 power plants in construction. This is the site of our first power facility taken from October of 2024. And I tromped around on this site and was very excited that we had cleared the space for our first power facility. And then this picture was taken less than 1 year later, our first power facility almost fully constructed. We're taking a because we've engineered the subsurface, it's allowed us to take a much more modular approach to the surface facility development. So historic geothermal projects really were bespoke projects in bespoke geographies with a bespoke commercial need. And we are actually able to standardize the engineering subsurface, allowing us to standardize the surface to drive efficiencies in our supply chain and efficiencies in our timeline. So we're working to reduce the cost and reduce the overall timeline of having to build these facilities because everyone wants power right now. When data centers come to you, they ask you, how quickly can you deliver power to us? And, some companies will say, okay, if I start a project today, I can deliver it 10 years from now. It is our goal to be able to say, if I start a project today, I will have power to you between, 13 and 20 months from now. And that's really the timeline that we're targeting as success. I unfortunately don't think that I can, shoot. I can't play this. I actually think it's a video in my PowerPoint. It's a video of site that's very cool that shows you drone footage of the whole thing. We can't see it, but what you can see actually is this is a drilling pad that has, at this time, 8 wells on it over here that you can't really see, and has now since drilled another 2 wells attached to a 33 megawatt power facility by this pipeline. In the distance, you see a second drilling pad and a third drilling pad. On these 3 pads, we have overall 24 wells that will feed this power facility over here on the right, and then there's actually now a third power facility constructed. This drone footage was actually taken in October of 2025, and now if you go to site, I'm going next week, you'll see 3 power facilities fully constructed. And so we're really reducing the footprint of geothermal energy too. This is 100 megawatts of generation off of 3 well pads and 3 ORC facility pads. The overall surface disturbance here is like, I think it's 20 acres no more. So it's really a compressed footprint. And, that's another value proposition of what we're trying to do. So this repeated development, this engineered system allows us to drill well after well after well, rather than traditional geothermal, which you were kind of designing the bespoke well every single time to target this series of natural fractures and you didn't quite know where it was. Instead, we're able to go into these well fields and drill 24 wells all right next to each other. And when you're drilling that many wells, well after well after well, you're picking up learnings along the way and able to implement them. And so what we've seen is a very effective track record in reducing the cost of drilling over time. This is a learning curve we expect to see not just in drilling, but in our hydraulic fracturing, which we call completions, and also in our power facility deployment for across the Cape Station project and beyond. So this is really the value proposition of how we're making geothermal energy affordable. When you start a project, it is still high cost. You're learning the resource, you're setting up your infrastructure, your supply chain, you're having to figure out how to get things there. But once you build facility after facility after facility, you've already incorporated a lot of that cost into sort of like your anchor power plants, and you're able to reduce cost over time. So this is really what we're driving towards. We're also driving towards making it much more cost effective overall. So in 2021, the National Renewable Energy Lab said that enhanced geothermal systems cost $27,800 per kilowatt to install. And it wasn't that different from where our initial project came in. Our initial project came in about half that at $15,000 a kW, which is not at all cost competitive with the market. And then, you see what we've done in the 2023 National Renewable Energy Laboratory update to the EGS estimates after we disclosed a bunch of our costs at Project Red, they showed that now costs are $14,700 a kilowatt. And by then we were already building Cape Phase 1 and had already achieved, this has actually been revised to $7,000 a kW. But again, today we're at about half of the National Renewable Energy Lab cost estimates. And when we look at subsequent phases of Cape, how we're innovating, how we're deploying, how we're leveraging efficiencies in our supply chain, we have a very believable path in the next phase of Cape Station, which is before the end of the 500 megawatt deployment, to be at about $5,500 a kilowatt. And in the future, we expect to be at $3,700 a kilowatt or even below at $3,000 a kilowatt. When you get to firm clean energy with no fuel at $3,500 or $3,000 a kilowatt, this becomes an incredibly ubiquitous resource that is competing with fossil generation, and we fully expect to get there in the next decade. So we're painting a very compelling picture of what's going on, but we actually have the track record and execution to back it up. We've had some incredible partners over time, which has been really instrumental to our success. We're seeing real collaboration from oil and gas parties who have basically said, oh, we see a massive market in geothermal energy. And because of that, we actually want to come help Fervo be successful in their wells. So this is how we've had access to a huge suite of drill bits to figure out what works best in our geothermal reservoirs, a huge suite of other oil field services. And so we're just seeing incredible traction in our supply chain that people really want to be a part of this story and see a big potential market in which to participate. Today, we have $7.2 billion in total contracted revenue across 16 different power purchase agreements. We anticipate fulfilling all these power purchase agreements by 2030 and bringing a gigawatt online by then, and then hoping to double that capacity in short order in the years that follow. One of the very cool things about reducing the cost of geothermal power is today it's very much a Western United States play. That's where there's really hot rock really close to the surface of the earth. And so it's a lot cheaper to drill to that hot rock. When you bring down the cost of drilling, it actually allows you to go deeper, opening up the geographic aperture of where you're able to go. And we are seeing, by the way, we're reducing costs in the Western United States, that is absolutely in the realm of the feasible, that in the next decade, we will be developing geothermal energy assets in the Eastern United States, where there is a massive amount of data center demand. Today, internally, we talk about a 41 gigawatt data center demand in the Eastern US. And no matter what you believe is happening in AI or data centers and how much demand will come out of them, we really do believe that there is just a huge demand of power, even in absence of AI. And if you look in the Eastern US, which I'm sure many of you are sitting in the Eastern US, power prices are going up and up and up. And so to be able to deploy this Western United States solution in multiple geographies could be incredibly powerful. I'll leave you with this. Next generation geothermal is truly poised for significant growth. when we install 500 gigawatts of capacity by 2028, Fervo Energy will make up 10% of US geothermal energy production, which has been an industry that's been clicking along for the last 60 years. When you look at our installation targets by 2035, Fervo is planning to surpass the entire global installed geothermal energy capacity in the next decade. And so what we believe is that we have found a truly scalable, widely deployable geothermal energy resource that is going to be a big part of our future of energy. So I think I'm 3 minutes over, but I'm happy to take questions as you have them.
Yes, Nora, thank you. I mean, I'm sorry, Sarah. Thank you so much. Yes, we've received a lot of questions. That was awesome. I think we are still, I know you covered seismicity. We're still getting questions on that. So could you just briefly cover that? Because we have some other really good questions.
Yes, I'll try to be so quick. Okay.
Okay.
Um, Geothermal energy is often found where there is already naturally occurring seismicity. It's a plate tectonics issue. So for any geologists out there, don't double click on my technical explanation because I'm going to try to simplify it. Geothermal energy exists where plate tectonics in the West are pulling apart, basically allowing, this is the non-technical part, really hot rock to be a lot closer to the surface of the Earth because the crust is kind of pulling apart. In those places where the basin is pulling apart, you're going to see parts where the basin is also pushing together. And that's how you get the basin and range of the Western United States, where you see a bunch of mountain ranges. In that place where rock is moving, you're going to find a lot of natural seismicity. So when you're pushing drill bits into rock and water, high pressure water into rock that already has natural seismicity, you are always running the risk of inducing seismicity, causing additional human driven seismicity. And so this is something that can actually sink our company and our industry if we were to trigger a really big earthquake. And so we have every incentive to be really, really good at controlling and mitigating induced seismicity. Department of Energy years ago put out sort of a best practices for mitigating induced seismicity. It was called the ISMP, the Induced Seismicity Mitigation Plan. We have actually copied that to the T and then worked with national labs and universities and the federal government to refine it. And then we have actually spent a massive amount in not only doing seismic monitoring ourselves, but having third parties come and do their own seismic monitoring around Cape Station. And we have a traffic light system that basically says, if we see this level of seismicity, this is what we do. If we see a slightly elevated level of seismicity, we shut down for this long. And if we see an even greater elevated level of seismicity, we basically stop operations completely. And what we've seen over years of operating at Cape Station is we've developed pattern matching to understand no matter what is happening in the subsurface, we are actually capable of controlling it with this kind of like advanced monitoring that we now have. We have one of the largest seismicity data sets that's ever been generated at this point in time. And we're learning a lot about seismicity that is allowing us to be a lot better at predicting it, avoiding it, and then controlling it when we are in seismic zones. So this is something we take super seriously and we will always say as a risk of our business, but we are learning to control it in a way that we can sort of coexist with it rather than cause damage.
That is awesome. That's a lot more than I realized what you were doing. So yay, I think that
Yeah,
answers
we've
all those
we've also
questions.
written a lot about this because it's one of the public's biggest concerns about geothermal energy. And geothermal has like this history of being associated with big earthquakes. And so if you go to our website, you'll see kind of like induced seismicity reviews of what we've seen at Cape Station and what we've done in our approach. And it's something we like to publish about a lot.
That's super. Okay, and then I know you covered environmental effects related to groundwater. But is it really true that there is no water loss in your um, underwater, your groundwater?
There is some water loss in our subsurface
Okay.
system. So we are
Okay.
we are fracturing into places. I mean, we would prefer there to be no natural fracturing systems because it would be great to have a completely homogeneous piece of rock that we engineer our system into. Homogeneous, low permeability rock, we would not lose a lot of water into the system because there's low porosity, low permeability.
Yeah.
Instead, because we're stepping away from traditional geothermal systems, So it is more homogeneous than a traditional geothermal system, but there is still some natural fracturing. And we're definitely seeing that as we've developed Cape Station. So we are experiencing some water loss to the resource. We're doing a couple of things to mitigate it. One, we've drilled wells and wells and wells. So I'm actually sad that I don't have our well plan here. But if you look down it, you'll see basically a gun barrel of 24 wells all right next to each other. And what we've seen from testing is that on your boundary wells, you end up losing more water to the resource than on your inside wells, which are all participating with one another. So by building at scale, in some ways, we've actually controlled a portion of this water loss. And then the other thing with water loss that's really interesting is what we've seen in these resources is as we start injecting, we have a higher water loss, like basically in the early days of filling the system. And then the resource sort of becomes saturated in a way where water loss in subsequent years is controlled. And so,
Gotcha.
it's not sustainable for us to lose all of our water to the natural
Yeah.
resource. We actually do not have the rights enough to that much water on the surface, even if it's brackish water, which all the water that we're injecting is brackish water. We still don't have the rights. We're operating in high mountain desert in the American West. Like you just can't get the
Right.
water rights to just like lose it all to the rock. And so
Yeah.
we're seeing enough controlled water loss that is actually working with the water rights that we're able to procure. And then we are injecting 100% brackish water into these systems because it doesn't have to be like really fancy, clean water.
Right. That's awesome. And on scaling the technology, that's something that we've got a lot of people here with scientific backgrounds. They're interested in, like what are your biggest hurdles? And also some hurdles not just related to the technology, but what about permitting, turbine backlogs, equipment shortages?
Okay, permitting. Let's start there. Permitting is going to be a hurdle no matter what, everywhere. 90% of quality geothermal resource in the West, I'm speaking from the West specifically, exists on federal lands. In federal lands, you have to go through a federal NEPA permitting process. Private lands has a lower burden of permitting, but still has some amount of environmental permitting you have to go through. Federal permitting is hard. You all have heard that. We have had incredible success in Utah. It's been like pretty much a dream to permit these projects in Utah. What have we done? We have been highly collaborative with the regulators. We have educated the regulators. We started with them years in advance of actually filing our NEPA permits. And so by the time we actually filed our NEPA permits, they had already told us what they need. We had already run all of the additional testing that they said that they wanted to see in order to feel comfortable with the project. They were familiar with the technology. They knew what we were doing. They knew us. They'd been out to site. It was like by the time they received the NEPA EA, we had already notified the community and all of the policymakers and said like, hey, we're going to submit this big permit. Please submit your comments into it and we will respond to them. But I think by the time we submitted, everyone felt comfortable and we had like record-breaking NEPA approval in Southwest Utah.
Nice.
A lot of people say like, oh, how'd you get around NEPA in Utah? We did not get around NEPA. We actually went through like a very, very detailed NEPA process in Utah. We just did it in a very collaborative way with the regulator. I think why I say it's going to be a problem is because it is a federal agency that has state sub-agencies. And those state sub-agencies actually all have different standards of performance. They all have different staffing. They all have different approaches, familiarity, resources. And so we imagine that when we go to a different state, even a different region in the same state, we're going to have a different experience. And so when we advocate for permitting on the Hill, we basically say we need some predictability of transfer of experience from office to office so that if we socialize with lenders that this is what we're going to do, they know that this is what we're going to do. It's going to take us 5 years to get a NEPA put through. It's not going to take you 10. So we advocate for consistency and predictability. And only when we believe we can't get consistency and predictability from adding resources, trying to get Congress to allocate more funding to the Bureau of Land Management, we've come up with some really creative ideas like a central technical agency for geothermal that helps all of the field offices permit geothermal. So this is what we spend most of our time doing and advocating for on the Hill. But only when all that breaks down do you have to say like, oh, we're going to permit these through categorical exclusions, which we don't like as FERVO. We would prefer to do
Mhm.
the full burden of NEPA. We just want it to be somewhat predictable.
Right.
I spent too
That's
long on
amazing.
permitting. Supply chain is
Yeah.
another conversation. It is something that is a risk for future development if we start going really, really fast. This industry's been sleepy for a long time. And frankly, when we went to market to bid out our first project saying we want 333 megawatt turbines, it was a size that like very few people had ever thought about in geothermal energy because the projects are typically much smaller. So we only had 4 bidders on our first project, and we saw 4 bidders on our second project. And none of them really are like the big turbine manufacturers. So like Siemens, you're not seeing bid into these projects because organic Rankine cycle turbines have never been a big market for them. It's kind of like a blip for them. And so, we are starting to stoke a lot of the supply chain. And what we've done is we've said, okay, for our supplier universe to grow and become more robust, we actually need to standardize our power facilities. And so if we say we're going to build 10 power facilities in the next, 48 months, every one of those power facilities is going to have 50 megawatt turbines attached to them. And so when we go to market, we're going to say the Fervo turbine is a 50 megawatt design, hoping that we will allocate a large number to Turboden, who's currently one of our suppliers. And then actually Baker Hughes bid into our first round and we're not competitive, bid into our second round and we're competitive, and is now talking about bidding into our third round. And so we hope we're basically like kind of seeding this supply chain in a way that will track our productivity as we grow and scale. We are contending with the rest of the people building power projects for things like transformers. And, we're basically planning to sign long-term supply agreements to procure a lot of that long lead time equipment in advance of developing. But for now, we are not seeing any meaningful chokes in our like geothermal specific supply chain.
That's amazing. Wow, that's a very smart approach with the standardization. Do you want to hand it over? Or are you still good? I've got the biggest question is
I'll give you
where,
another 5 minutes. Yeah.
okay, okay, the biggest question, multiple questions, everyone's asking.
And I'm
So
sorry,
where
Robin,
are other
if I could
sure.
just interrupt for a minute. Tom is on the line.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe while Sarah is answering this question, you could make him co-host because I can't do that, so he can't unmute. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, of course. Okay. Yeah, the question is where where other than where you are at in Utah and other locations can enhanced geothermal be deployed? I mean, they're asking, can it be done on the eastern coast? When
Yeah.
is it
So
coming to my state? So, are there specific things you're looking for? We're all excited to get geothermal energy.
Yeah, so it's all kind of a question today of cost. And I had showed this. Let's see if I can pull it back up. Aligned with AI infrastructure. Can you see my screen? Hello, Robin?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
we can
Okay,
see your
great.
screen.
Um, okay, you can see here, Fervo operations are this light blue. So we have a project that's up and running in Nevada, and we are working on building a project in Southwest Utah. These are like primary key Western markets where geothermal has been deployed in the past. And that's where there's really hot rock really close to the surface of the earth. And so it's very economic for us to build projects there now. In order to expand, well, we have a 600,000 acre lease portfolio in the Western United States across Washington, Idaho, California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. And so we are expanding the geographic reach in the Western United States today. It is economic. In order to make it economic to come east, we have to lower the cost of geothermal energy in the West, and then that will open up the geographic aperture for the resource. And so we're already doing that today. Our low risk places are in the Western United States, and we're actually a reasonably capital constrained entity because geothermal sleepy, and people don't necessarily believe without the proof in the pudding that we are doing something completely different. We're already starting to attract more sources of finance to this business, but we still sort of have to prove that this is a really, really financeable energy resource in the West. As we do that, and as we lower the cost of geothermal energy, the Eastern US starts to become more and more attractive. So already we're looking at kind of like this interesting space in East Texas. We're looking at a place here in South Central Texas. We've looked at Eastern Louisiana. We're looking at Pennsylvania. We're starting to look at some of these spots that have a lot of oil and gas data. So we already know something about the subsurface in places that we think have like pretty friendly and excited regulatory environments. Like the governor's office in Pennsylvania has told me they will do anything to get us to come to Pennsylvania next. And that's actually pretty attractive to us because like we've had a very friendly regulatory environment in Utah. And the worst thing is that we kind of like take a leap of faith. We go develop in the Eastern United States and the regulatory environment is what kills us. And so we are looking for like those more high confidence places to go develop first. And that's why Pennsylvania has been so attractive to us. So I believe that in a decade, I will still be working at Fervo and we will have, multiple of these light blue dots similar to these on, in the Eastern US. We're just not there yet.
That's fabulous. Okay,
Okay,
well, I
is
know you
Tom
have to
here? I'm going
run,
to hand the
and
baton to
I
Tom.
see Tom Erb is able to answer
Tom.
questions. Yay!
Okay, Tom is on my team. I will introduce him quickly. Tom leads our
Sure.
government affairs in the federal realm. So Tom sits in DC. He's been working for us since October and is fantastic. And Nora is going to be here too. Nora is Fervo's chief of staff. I have to step back into a meeting that I stepped out of, but you will be in very good hands with these two, and they can answer any other questions that you have. I thank you so much for having me today. I feel very appreciative of all the work I've already done with
Thank
CCL,
you.
and I'm very excited to keep working with you all in the future.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay,
Bye.
awesome. Okay, well, we do have more questions, so let me continue on. So let me just do a we've got some technical questions here. So how, okay, these can be answered quickly, hopefully, just like a lightning round, but how long can a geothermal site produce power? Doesn't the heat reduce over time? I know there was a slide that Sarah covered that, but is there any other insight you can provide?
Yeah, I can start us off and then pass it over to Tom. Typically, when we think of a project, we're looking at a 30-year life cycle, but the Earth is quite hot, and so the idea is you could continue to drill additional maintenance wells to sort of keep that production rate flowing high. And so effectively, when we plan on being at a specific location in our community, we're planning decades at a time.
That's great. Um, Anything else to add, Tom?
No, but if I may, real quickly, I wanted to highlight my history with CCL and how much I appreciate you all.
Oh,
Because
we would love that.
yeah, I see Brett, I see some familiar faces, but I actually started with CCL Claremont when I was at the Claremont colleges way back in college. And then I've worked for Congressman Scott Peters and then Senator Hickenlooper as their energy advisors. So from permanent reform and carbon pricing and Fix Our Forest Act and all those things, CCL's been absolutely amazing. And it's funny that CCL taught me how to be a lobbyist, and now I'm actually a registered federal lobbyist. So I went full like slimy lobbyist factor, but it's for a good cause in geothermal. So I just want to say I appreciate you all so much. And Nora answered that question perfectly, but we can keep going on the other questions as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to mention that yes, one of our policy areas is permitting reform. So yeah, we really do want to support you. And that was another question. What can we do to support your work? We know that you're getting bipartisan, both sides of the aisle are watching your progress.
I'm happy to jump in on that one. I think three of our top federal policy areas, and there's a bunch that can be done at the state level as well. So no matter what state you're in, there's work that can be done. I cover the federal level. Here, number one is increasing federal funding for geothermal. It's historically been underinvested in compared to other technologies, and right now it's really a key moment where targeted investments can be catalytic for us scaling at the rate that I'm sure Sarah talked about. So through the Department of Energy, whether it's through the Loan Programs Office or some of the grant programs there, increasing funding for demonstration funding, exploration drilling, things like that are really key. Second is permitting. There's both the larger permitting reform conversation that includes everything you're aware of with transmission and NEPA reform, et cetera. And transmission is probably our number one permitting reform ask, so we're very in favor of that. And I know all of you are already working hard on that effort. I'd say something very near term is we're expecting next week the House Natural Resources Committee to mark up 9 geothermal permitting bills. seven of which will probably move on unanimous consent. So it's an extremely bipartisan kind of like bread and butter CCL issue. And seeing those bills move through the House and then also pass through the Senate is a major priority for us. And I think a perfect place for CCL to jump in. And then third is long-term tax certainty. So in the Republican reconciliation bill, geothermal was spared compared to some of the other technologies on long-term certainty, but there's more work and tweaks that can be done there to make sure you have that long-term horizon of development and tax credits that we can benefit
Right.
from. So those are probably top three.
That's awesome. Thank you. We do have, so the second highest number of questions are regarding energy costs. I know that costs keep coming down because you're doing a great job with the technology. But so example, do you have figures for the actual cost per kilowatt of your project? What is the full cycle cost, and what are the total system costs? Just all kinds of what do you anticipate the levelized cost of energy to be? What is your target? So what can you offer? What can you say?
Yeah, I'm happy to start us off. I think the metric we really like to use is dollars per kilowatt and really focusing on that CapEx, primarily because geothermal is so capital intensive. And so we want to share those costs up front. I'll also say, especially for us, like an electron produced in the middle of the day versus an electron being produced in the middle of the night on like the coldest winter day is very different. And so that sort of distinction isn't factored as well in LCOE, and so we prefer to use the dollars per kilowatt number. And I think Sarah really shared a very nice cost curve, but primarily when we're talking about Cape Phase 1, we're talking about numbers closer to $7,000 a kilowatt. For Cape Phase 2, we're talking to numbers closer to $5,500 a kilowatt. And then we see in the next decade or so, roughly like a pathway to $3,000 a kilowatt, which is competitive with natural gas today. So when we're talking about an energy source that's reliable, that's clean, that's 24/7 baseload power, that is also cost competitive within the next 10 years with natural gas, like that's a very, very attractive source of energy.
That's that's very impressive. We're pretty happy with that. Um, so going back to some technical questions. Um, so so looking at the rock formation that you're drilling down into, does it require high porosity already, or is that a limit of siting locations?
We actually prefer low porosity rock. So unlike shale,
Okay.
um, the biggest difference is we're drilling in granite, right? So it's a much lower porosity rock, and the idea is we're creating the fractures or engineering the subsurface ourselves. And we prefer low porosity because a lot of that leak off that we discussed, that water leak off, the risk reduces immensely. And so we drill in harder rock, we drill in hotter rock, and we prefer geology that is a lot more low porosity than traditional shale. Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything to.
Oh no, I'm still working on my geology 5 months in, so that was perfect, Nor.
Another question is about your drilling technologies. Like what makes your drilling technology unusual or unique to this field?
Yeah, here's the interesting thing is the IP itself isn't around drilling. The IP is around the application of an existing technology which was used for shale oil and gas, but now just being used for a completely different resource, which is heat. And so we are doing something that no one's ever done before. And I think that's actually the key to why we're cost competitive. It's because we have had this industry that has iterated on this technology for decades. And it's really perfected at a specific rock formation and done it at specific depths. And now what we're doing is we're simply taking that and adapting it to something different. And so actually the H&P rig that we're using used to drill for oil and gas. Now it's just drilling for geothermal. So there are a lot of like linear and parallel comparisons there. So quick answer is No real uniqueness in the technology, just uniqueness in the application.
Great. Um, and are you thinking of looking at the laser drilling techniques in the future?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I mean it's saying that you're using lasers or millimeter wave technology is just very exciting and very sci-fi. The way Fervo looks at approaching hotter rock is very much in a step change format. So we actually just drilled our hottest well to date, or we announced that just a couple of weeks ago, and that's in Blandford in Utah, and that's 555 degrees Fahrenheit. And we use traditional drilling technology. And so for us, I think the biggest thing is why try and innovate on something that would even increase drilling costs even more when you can get to where you need to with existing technology? And so while we see ourselves as we develop, as we drill more wells, as we add more projects, there's a step change factor where we'll get to the hotter wells using just existing technology that we continue to iterate on. Although, I mean, our engineers are amazing and they could be working on some incredible things right now, but I think the drilling technology is doing what it needs to.
Um, this, okay, kind of jumping around here, but what about for the future? How quickly do you feel like EGS can be scaled up so that it's playing a significant role in the energy mix?
That's a great question. And I think, you talk to Tim, who's our CEO and co-founder, and you talk to Sarah and the entire leadership team. There's a core belief that enhanced geothermal can be the backbone of the US grid. And we see a pathway to being 20% of the entire US grid. And so we're sort of tackling that, um, through just one project at a time. But we think just because the earth is hot everywhere and, just it's a matter of economics on where you can drill. But as you come down the cost curve, you can access more sites. Um, there's a lot of potential there. And there have been numerous studies, from Stanford, from national labs that really showcase that there are 700 gigawatts of untapped EGS in the mainland US alone. And so there's a lot of opportunity there.
I can add a little bit on that. I think um, it's not really a matter of if it's going to scale, what pace it's going to scale, and we have the good thing about geothermal in the political sense is it's a solution to whatever your challenge is, right? Affordability, climate, AI, et cetera. It provides an answer to all those questions. Low environmental impact, baseload power. And we're very confident in the technology innovation and the cost reductions. I think a large driver of scale and how quickly we hit those goals that Nora laid out is the regulatory and policy side of it, right? Because even if we can hit our 18-month drilling to power production timeline, like if you have a 3 or 4 year interconnection queue, we're being delayed by that. So continuing the advocacy around getting more transmission built in this country and figuring out avenues so the regulatory system is lined up with our ability for cost reductions and scalability, I think is a really important part of how quickly we're going to move.
I keep looking to my left because I'm monitoring the chat questions. There's so many. Um, so is there, thank you for that question. Is there robust underground data supporting cost-effective drilling, or is that a limiting factor, or you need more data to determine the best locations?
So luckily, there's actually a trove of data that we make use of. For example, USGS data, data from abandoned oil wells that, have are no longer being in use, but there's temperature data there. The data that the Utah Forge project specifically like was immensely helpful in helping Fervo decide to drill at Cape Station. So while there is data, we also use a number of like internal AI models to really understand the subsurface, and we've become very, very close. So, for example, at Cape Station alone, We were on target 97.5% of like all the temperature and pressure modeling that we had initially looked at before we drilled our wells. And when we compared, we found that we were very, very on the mark. And so I will say something like a Utah Forge, if we could have that in multiple states around the country, would be immensely helpful. Like one in the Pacific Northwest, one in the East, one in the South. Like that sort of collaboration, especially between academic institutions and the federal government, is just incredibly useful. And like Fervo has built such a strong working relationship with our partners at Forge, and they've been incredible to work with. And being able to share data and understand what the other institution is doing has just been incredible. And Tom, I think you'll have more insight on that than I would.
I'm sorry, Nora, which point exactly? I got distracted by something.
Oh, the questions probably. No, just like is there enough data, and how can like federal or academic institutions help us build more of that data, that database?
Yeah, there's a lot of effort in that, both in the appropriations process. So there's an effort to get bipartisan support for additional funding for USGS mapping. That's a effort every single year, and one that's active right now in a Senate conversation. And then we're seeing more and more research and development bills pop up in conversations. The House Science Committee and Senators Murkowski and Cortez Masto are working on a larger research and development bill that also has a component of subsurface mapping and testing. So I think those are the efforts at the federal level where we're trying to get more funding and more expansive approaches to revealing, testing and revealing that data.
Hey, we're getting towards the end of towards the top of the hour, but I want to ask one more question. So, uh, back to siting again. So can EGS decentralize energy generation? Smaller locations with smaller uh, production, but also what about deploying at existing like coal facilities when maybe that production winds down?
Yes. So the question is, let me ask the second answer the second question first.
Okay.
Deploying at existing coal facilities, we could go and while we would need to look at the resource, we would need to look at a number of things, but especially if interconnection and transmission is one of the biggest issues, and we have a coal plant that's decommissioning and opening up a spot in the queue, that's a very attractive proposal for Fervo. But we would not be able to use any of the existing equipment. The turbines are likely different. And so since we've committed to only using binary air-cooled condensers, and so we don't use any water on the surface facility side of that. I think it would be unlikely that we could reuse some of that equipment, but siting where existing coal plants are, especially to use that interconnection transmission queue, is very attractive and something we're actively looking at. And then maybe repeat the first part of your question, Robin.
Oh, yeah, it had to do with existing oil and gas wells. I think there's so many questions, but is
Mm,
that can those be utilized? The defunct wells?
yeah. We've looked at that before, and I think for the purpose of extracting heat in the most efficient way that makes use of the asset long term, it's not something that we are seeing like a viable path forward to today. But that's not to say that that isn't something we could really look into in the future, but it's not something we're focusing on today. The wells we drill are specifically built with the idea of extracting geothermal heat and like circulating that brine. And so we have very specific parameters around how wide they need to be, how thick they need to be to protect that groundwater, and how insulated they are, because we are drilling much hotter wells than they would for oil and gas. And so we're not there yet, but hopefully if we're able to in the future would be incredible.
Well, I think we need to wrap it up there. If I could, I would like to summarize some of the hundreds of questions that were asked and send those to you. But yeah, thank you so much, Nor and Tom, and send our thanks to Sarah and the entire Fervo leadership team for today's event. We're in awe and greatly inspired by your work. Thank you, everyone who attended. This is our kickoff event of the Geothermal Power Action Team. So I want to put this in the chat on how you can join. Chat, where did you go? There. And so tune into our action team for future events. I am the co-leader with Wayne of our Geothermal Power Action Team. And watch your inbox for a follow-up of email on how to join our team and link to today's recording. So are you inspired about what you heard today? At Citizens Climate Lobby, we're committed to advancing federal policies that reduce emissions, remove climate pollution, and protect people. We empower everyday people to bridge divides and build political will for effective climate solutions in Congress. So we invite you to join us. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.